I feel really lucky to be involved in this project, and I say that because I feel as though I inherited it. I became the academic director of the archive at UEA in summer 2021, and my predecessor, Josh Smith, who I think is also in the room here somewhere, was already working with the archivist at UEA, Justine Mann, on the project that became what we're doing this evening. And just to tell you briefly what that was, it was an application to the Mellon Foundation in America to fund an initial stage of seeing what it would be like to develop a different way of collecting poetry archives. And they came to UEA particularly because of what we call the storehouse model there, which is something that Justine, as the archivist, has been developing for many years. We won't say a lot about that now, but it's at the heart of this project. And what it means is that we invite writers to loan us materials, not necessarily the whole of their archives, and not on a permanent basis, but on a temporary basis, and that means that we can represent different writers in different ways, and they can be made available to students and teachers and researchers. And we didn't have any poetry in the archive, but around the same time we were offered the papers of a poet called Sarah Maguire, some of you may know, who was also the founder of the Poetry and Translation Centre. So at the same time, we've been cataloguing Sarah Maguire's papers, and although it's not directly related to this event, I'm happy to say that they are now catalogued by the redoubtable Rufus Talks, who is in the room somewhere as well. There he is right at the back, and they're going to be made available too. They are being launched this month. So that is just a little bit of the backstory of what this project is. And once we began working on it in earnest this year, the first person to join our project team was Will Harris, who is our visiting poetry fellow. And he has been invaluable in so many ways, as somebody who knows poets, know how poets think. Basically, he's been our poet whisperer and has lured all the other poets into participating in this project. And we're also very lucky to be working on this project with partners in the Norfolk Library Service and with the National Centre of Writing, which is the building that we are in. And we also have around us, to make sure that we are doing what we said we would do, what we want to do, we've got an advisory group made up of poets and critics and archivists and other interested people. So, I've said quite a lot about how we come to be here doing what we're doing, but what are we doing? I think the best way, hopefully just to give you a sense of what we're doing, is to read a little bit of the summary that we sent to the Mellon Foundation. So I'll do that, and forgive me for slightly sort of lapsing into administrative academic speech here, but I hope it won't be a totally unfamiliar language to you. So, the Centre for Contemporary Poetry in the Archive that we're working towards will have at its heart a pioneering collection of underrepresented poetries, the development of which will be informed by an actively revisionist response to the historical canonization of white male poets working in discursive lyric modes, which has marginalized many other voices of interest and importance to readers, students, teachers, and scholars of poetry in Britain and Ireland. By establishing this archive, we hope that it will be fit to represent, value, promote, and preserve the archives of contemporary poets of colour, queer poets, and other historically underrepresented backgrounds and practices. Our approach to understanding and defining underrepresentation will be alert to cross-cutting forms of discrimination in British and Irish literary culture relating to class, gender, and ability. We will also look to critically value and promote innovative formal approaches to contemporary poetic composition, such as the conceptual, the visual, the performed, and the digital, as well as to the poetic use of dialects and creoles spoken by communities which have been historically marginalised in the UK and Ireland. And with this project, we'll seek to democratise engagement with the archive through public events, such as this one, and community involvement. And the ultimate aim of the project will be to develop interdisciplinary and creative critical learning between poets, researchers, and archivists, and to share this learning with the wider professional communities of contemporary poetry and archives and special collections. And we're particularly concerned with raising awareness of contemporary vulnerabilities in the Poetry Archive and making recommendations for collection and safeguarding of culturally diverse and materially hybrid archives and the revitalization of curatorship, engagement, and heritage culture. So that is our mission statement, and there's a lot in it. But if you'd like to know more about the project, please do feel free to get in touch. And we're going to be beginning to make material available through the BACW website, including a video of this event this evening. Okay, so we're going to have the poets reading, and we're going to have the conversations. So I'm slightly aware that this microphone is going to start. There we go. Okay. And we're going to have some conversation just to begin to think about what it is to engage with your own archive as a writer, because all these poets who are here this evening have only relatively recently said yes to taking part in it. So it's early days for all of us. And finally, I would say that we do have a few copies of texts of the poems that some of the poets are going to be reading. If anybody didn't pick one up on the door and would like one now, I have, well, actually, I just have them here. It's not very convenient, is it? Maybe, Will, can I give them to you? Okay. So I'm now going to move over to introducing the poets on my left. And I'm going to do that very briefly because I'm much more interested in giving them time to tell you about themselves. The first poet we'll hear from will be Vahni Anthony Capildeo, who was born in Trinidad and lives in Scotland. They're a writer in residence and professor at the University of York and an honorary student of Christ Church in Oxford. And in giving this bio, I'm just giving you a few selected highlights. The whole thing you can find online. They've published 8 books of poetry, beginning with No Traveller Returns in 2003, and coming most recently to Like a Tree Walking from Carcanet. And they've also published 8 pamphlets, although I think that count may be going up if it's... Sorry. Okay, well, I read on Carcanet's website that you had published 8 books and 8 pamphlets, which seemed to me a nice symmetry. And it also took me to a quotation from a wonderful essay I was reading by the critic Vidyan Ravintharan recently, who said that Capildeo's work method is to try things out in a chapbook or a pamphlet, which is then contained and transfigured in the next full collection. So the movement between the smaller and the larger publication is something that has characterized their work over the years. Another collection I feel I should mention is Measures of Expatriation, which won the Forward Prize in 2016. So I know that what they're going to read is going to be from a selection of their work. I'd be interested to hear the route that they're thinking of taking through an extremely prolific body of publications. Okay, I'll also do the introduction for Gail now, and then I'll sit down and you won't hear from me for a bit. So Gail McConnell grew up in Belfast, where she now works as a reader in the School of English at Queen's University. She's published a critical study called Northern Irish Poetry and Theology in 2014, 2 pamphlets, one of which was called 14, and one of which was called Father Mother, and which was published through the Ink, Sweat and Tears pamphlet competition, which has a strong Norwich connection, and copies, I hope, will be available afterwards. And also, most recently, the book-length sequence, The Sun is Open, with Penned in the Margins Press. And that book won the John Pollard Foundation International Poetry Award. And I have another quotation from another critic here, a really interesting piece by a critic called Dave Coates online in Spam magazine, that's right, S-P-A-M, who said of The Sun is Open that he felt it was close in spirit to J. Bernard's Surge, and we'll be hearing from Jay a bit later, in its ruminations over the ethics of speaking to, with, and for the dead. So on that note, I'll sit down and hand over to Anthony Vahni.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. It's always a surpassing joy to be in Norwich. I have no idea why I've chosen this particular route through the works that I'm going to read, other than that I start with early things and I also end with something I've never read before. So beginning with something I haven't read for more years I can remember, and ending with something that I have no idea how to read. September, from winter to winter in undraining sea. Iron Age stone words. If we'd grown barley, we'd have had to mill it. So we grew blades. The grass is species rich. They built their houses and crypts built like houses. Hills drank up their houses as did perfect sand. Kale, linseed, mustard seed, attractive to bird life. They cut us to ladders, push down, pull down, fall down, feeding the earth. Many of the skeletons are disarticulated. Foot shelves, scale-collared, hang moisture for weather, seeping to earth. We think they practiced excarnation. We grow over darkness that's ill to imagine, rounded in earth. The exposure of corpses to scavengers and air. If we flipped bone fields, live ones could visit, so we turf blades. A deep freeze, an execution chamber, nobody knows, so it can be what you like. It is too cold for wheat here now. Have a cheerful day at the tombs. They build their houses on mounds closed on houses, from rubble from houses left half to stand. Broch, red sand, lead silver, the timed sea upon us, and no human witness. Then we shall have passed. That's before I was aware of being a marginalised poet and thought I could simply write about Orkney, having done Old Norse. The next one is properly marginalised, but again, I didn't know. This is from Darkened and Accustomed Words, 2008 it was finished. Framboyan, that trees had evolved to eat other trees, that this happened at the end of a garden, that this was first noticed in a small tree's wincing, that the larger tree was bending in, whipped by no wind, a flamboyant tree and not in flower, bunched to a beak. Dwarf and royal Ponciana trees, almost one kind, at the end of a Trinidad childhood garden, that the small tree visibly respired, menaced, yet stock still, spread and ruffled, animal yet green. This one, yes, in flower as if on fire, yet in devouring distress, letting air in, yet feather-tipped and all aflame, just like an offshoot of what stood over. Hardly leafed, intent and purposeful, stacked alto stratus stormbark, discovering its due, moved in to take, concave against odds of weather. Pitiless, we witness small uprootings, turn with each untree-like recommencing, retreat further into the house, feel ourselves delicate, stridently walk, shuddering bolts shut, instinct outraged, no, we are next who shall be due to fall under green shade. But lock the doors, the well-made doors, investment, property. The thing is busy outside. That tree evolved to eat other trees. It is good our doors are good, and indeed it centred in the earth, the slate, the concrete, and indeed it entered wading, for our doors were wood. I think I'll skip over the next one called Calling Time because it's got the wrong colour in it. I don't really want to do purple-blue. It made sense when I was picking the set in Trinidad because the night goes purple-blue, but here it's more silvery blue. So this is skipping forward to 3 poems commissioned by the amazing Polly Atkin for a Dorothy Wordsworth Remembered series of artworks and texts which are appearing on a website online for the 250th anniversary of Dorothy Wordsworth. I always had a terrible horror of the Wordsworths and their small cottage and the claustrophobia of it. And I didn't really give Dorothy much time when I was younger. I assumed she was invalidish and talked about as being gifted because one has to reclaim things, etc. I was cynical about that. And then I started reading her diaries and realized that she drank rum whenever she could and did all the editing and would take in poor people and then write incredibly sharp things about them in a satirical fashion as if she were planning a political novel at some point, and also read the poor people reams of poetry. So she read them Chaucer at one point. She took them in, warmed them, fed them, and read them Chaucer. Anyway, the first bit is ecologies of attention. Ecologies of attention. A table made of apple wood, an apple grows at home. A woodland cord to press a fence upon the apple's home. A dance of seeds around the core, around to dance alone. By heart you know the steps, like men, like bears, who sleep alone. See a storm, be in the storm, or stop the storm. An act of will stops the storm? In imitation of a storm, stopping by an act, not of will, if weather had will, your will imitating the storm's flash of recognition. Lightning does not stop, but makes eerie darkness. Lightning that does not stop, stops, starts. Love, biting like love, more than like a mouth sleep, like grass stalks, like werewolves, soft necks, pterodactyl neighborhoods, preen endure, turbine hazards, dinocute. Editor, they're on the world stage, laughing and dancing, when you know their body language should be pain. Cotton, cobblestone, pain. Editor, they're speaking editorially again. Stop, stop. Good, good, pay. Sob, reproduce, lawsuit, inscape, gratitude, outrage. Like holy thing groaning aloft. An innocent attention lapse, ecologies of thistledown, Neolithic somnambulism. Anyway, we are sitting on one washed rock together for the indefinite. Let's talk. Where from? Place forgetting, place forgetfulness, place would forget. Are you fistful, blood, library, armies, conflagration, bedrooms, piss cup, precious stones? Where from midnight, lunar last day, calendar knocking the base of one of the statues, the plinth will open and tell. They cannot build, they find their echo chamber, the open sky. Interesting. Borrow a rose garden, most interesting. Drum up an adequate cohort of toads. Well, is who indigenous to horseback? Is who indigenous to airports? Is who native to swimming pools? Is who native to deserts? Is originally appropriation, is originally the longest queue, ancestry strangers, ancestry embers, ancestry laborers, ancestry lawyers, ancestry mobsters, beggars, pie makers, beautiful beggars, unpublished pie makers, priests on repeat, bridegrooms who make up their face, the fair and the fierce, the sun and the moon sharing a ring. Anyway, we are leaning in on one washed rock, together for the indefinite rise. By heart you know the steps like lace, a willingly pierced face. So the next bit is addressing what would happen if people tried to raise the spirit of Dorothy Wordsworth by some of the occult means popular among poets these days. Divining Dorothy. And they turned up the cards. The soy candle snickered. Something clicked. They said, let's call her up, a dream of frail girls, genetic sexual attraction. Place your hand, flatly hold a seance. The stones spoke owls, the owls spoke walls, the walls spoke moss, the moss spoke most of nothing, of frail girls. Coming through, Stoner D in denim shorts, heavy on the eyeliner, shooting Andy Warhol first, not her. French film, traffic jam, Doro hits up Alice Bell, deserts her car, heads into the woods. Are you there, frail girl, faint girl, Violet, between the liner, support act, sister, let's rescue you. What have we raised in a top hat? Drawling, call me Desmond, come to the cabaret. And they dropped the cards, put out the lights, stopped the clocks, declared her dead, picked a bowl of daffodils, unnerved by her bodyful double rainbow laughter. And that's partly thinking that the closest match to Dorothy Wordsworth journals is the Chris Kraus or something like that, really. The last poem, which returns to calendar format, I haven't really read enough about it, but Polly Atkin was discussing with me the concept of crip time, whereby time changes the way it allows itself to be perceived, or one's perception of lived time changes according to physical condition. She wants a fire even in the summer. Sometimes a road is a major event, a walk endures more than a calendar. April, January, February, March, chest full of bluebells, breath a wet black bough. March, March, marriage to a stage magician, spring, again you love sawing me in half. Coughing up fur balls, a wealth of wool, May rewilds me, foaming I mouth May, a wolf. Summer bestows few vows. December comes as June's bare effigy, a month, a tooth, falls out, jaws of the year, breathing bluebells, giblet pies. I can write or talk, not both. Should July have held hands with September, August overdosed on June, sun enough in my marrow for wet stockings to do for entire weeks of June. Each breath a word chesting up from the inky desk of heaviness. October was 1 month or 3, I tell you. November a road. My feet set down December. Crip times betrothed. Thank you. I will recostume myself as the Penguin of Doom now.
Good evening. Hi. Thanks for coming out on a damp Monday. You're as bad as a Belfast poetry crowd. My goodness. You people not got better places to be. No, this is amazing. Thank you. Actually, do you mind clicking? Yeah, that would be lovely. It's a real joy to be here. It's a real joy to be part of this exciting project about which I am really curious to see where it goes. So thank you, Jeremy and Justine and Will, for the invitation to be part of this, and to everybody else who has made it possible for me to be part of it. I'm really, really grateful. And it's an honour to be on a project with Anthony, Vahni and Jay and Joelle. So we're going to have fun. I'm going to start with a praise poem about a creature I admire. and it's called Worm. Burrowing in your allotted patch, you move through the dark, muscles contracting one by one in every part, lengthening and shortening the slick, segmented tube of you, furrows in your wake. Devising passages for water, air, you plot the gaps that keep the structure from collapse. Dead things, you know, plants and creatures, both. Your grooves shift matter, sifting as you go. Eyeless, your appetite erates, eating the world, you open it. You ingest to differentiate. Under the foot-stamped earth, you eat into a clot of leaf mould, clay, and mildew, and express what you can part with, as self-possessed as when you started. Your secretions bind the soil. Your shit enriches it. How things lie now will be undone, will reoccur. You, a surface-level archivist, sensing all there is can be gone through. The body born within its plot. It's a good life, eating and expressing things. It struck me as I was thinking about this event and this project that the Worm is an archivist. And I've been thinking about what is an archive and what is the place of the archive in writing. And I've been thinking about this a lot for myself over the past couple of years in an experience that I had of being given a lot of stuff, bits of paper, newspaper cutouts, reports from Hansard, lots of documents, lots of paperwork about an autobiographical event. And that autobiographical event was my father's murder. He was a prison governor in the Maze prison, and he was shot and killed by the IRA outside our home in Belfast in 1984. I was 3. My mother and I were standing outside our house in East Belfast to wave him off to work, and 2 gunmen crossed the drive and shot him dead. And so my life has been shaped by this event in all kinds of ways, and with all the stuff that brings to my life, history and politics and empire and the troubles and violence and conflict and class and power and all kinds of things. And so my grandparents, my mum, my aunts gave me a kind of an archive of stuff about this event, and I really wasn't sure what to do with it. So I got one of those crap flat pack boxes from IKEA and composed it, constructed it and put all the stuff inside it. But then once the stuff was in there, I would sort of try and pull it all out and make sense of it. And so the book, The Sun is Open, I suppose is the culmination of a series of attempts to try and work out what to do with all this stuff and to try to understand or to try to grapple with some of the different languages that were in that box and the different ways they could speak. So I find myself interested not only in the headlines, but in the sort of incidental or happenstance things that were in there. So the first slide, I think there you saw a crossword, and there was my dad's handwriting on the back of an article with, random-ish words written on it. Or I became interested in the generic material that was in there. Like I had my father's diaries from when he was an undergraduate student, and I became interested in the first aid instructions that were printed at the start of the book, and in how the kind of seemingly impersonal could resonate in new ways. When I approached all of it with a kind of, a particular attention to thinking about grief and its aftermath, if there's ever an aftermath to grief. So some of the text that you'll see in the columns that are printed, a lot of the poems are in these kind of blocks or these kind of box shapes. The grey text indicates material, like fine material that I was working with from that. I think that's probably all you need to know. Maybe just the last thing to say is there's an image here of the dad box where, I call it the dad box. I did write that on the side because I'm crazy, I don't know. But at the heart of the archive, or this archive, there's a relationship. And I think that was the discovery of trying to write this book, is that the thing that you can do in poem that you can't do in an archive is that you can make the dead speak, and that you can speak to the dead, and maybe even have them speak back. And so the discovery really was not what was in the box, but it was that I had a relationship with my father that I couldn't remember, but I could imagine by trying to write the poems. So thanks for listening. I'm going to read from The Sun is Open. And it opens with a note. On the morning of March 6th, 1984, Mr. William McConnell, Assistant Governor of the Maze Prison, was outside his home, checking underneath his car for explosive devices, when he was shot dead in front of his wife and 3-year-old daughter. Begin with victim on his back is how this could begin. Place your mouth over his mouth. Pinch his nostrils shut. Easier to take what I have found and break it up. Breathe steadily till victim's chest begins to rise. Pause every minute to glue it back the wrong way. Take a deep breath yourself. If there is no air exchange, do not touch him. You assemble it yourself. It came flat pack, a square with folded sides. You put them all in place and twist in shallow screws. You punch the pins through holes, fold back the legs, put in what you have. Mostly piles of cutouts from the papers, 8 inches thick. Church bulletins, school magazines, Hansard, Bibles, a student's union diary from his time at Queen's, reports, things he wrote. Hey, presto, got a dad box. Wrote that on the side, not sure why. When we have guests, I turn it to the wall. When I want to see inside, I make piles on the spare room bed and on the floor. Then forget what it was I was looking for. White cotton handkerchief. You knotted all the corners and set it on my head under the sun at Helen's Bay. I know it happened in a photo. I know it happened from a photo. I know it happened, and the photo is something you have left. My father rejoices. That's what it means. My name, I mean. But did he? What, if anything, was the source of his joy? Was there joy between us before he left? Or after he walks through the hall, the squeaky door settle, across the tiles, walking outside into the morning, into those bullets sailing through the blue air, into perforation, into a heap, into gravel, an almost human shape, into death, into silence, or whatever comes after. A paler shade, still grey, that square, the mark there on the floor where dad box isn't. Some sound somewhere, some sound along the road, in through the skylight, aisles maybe, no, not aisles right here. It's back in the spare room again. I had it here beside my desk while typing. I don't want to see it now. Thank you.
Thank you both for those wonderful readings. Now we're going to lapse into prose, I guess, talking to each other.
Or song.
Or song, yeah, okay. So I'll count us in. I think I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions to both of you about archives. Because as I said at the start, we're all at the beginning of this project, so I don't think we need to pretend that we have sort of fully formulated insights to offer yet. But it does occur to me, speaking with Vahni Anthony earlier and listening to you read, Gail, talking about the worm as a kind of archivist, and also thinking about boxes in general, the role that boxes play in our lives for containing things and as sources for the writing of poetry. Could both of you maybe just sort of reflect a little on the importance of, as a writer, having that material to go to open up, to engage with, and how that works for you, how worming through it feels?
Yeah, you're always kind of worming through something or other, whatever your current obsession is. Like for a while, it was seahorses. When I was writing the Father Mather pamphlet, I was obsessed with seahorses, and so all of my research was seahorses. And then with there you go, thank you. And I'm as you're saying that, Jeremy, I'm picturing the boxes in our house that contain Lego. Our sons, like our 4-year-olds, all the Lego, and I feel like I'm deep in that at the minute, and not deep in my own research, which is why there's not much writing happening. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. The archive is endless. Just this week, my mother gave me my father's like leather-bound pocket diary that was in his breast pocket, and there's a bullet mark on it where it was grazed when he was shot. Like that's for the dad. What do I do with that? I don't know. I don't know what I do with that, and I've seen it before. And so, I've written this book, I've been through the box, I've done the thing, and I feel like I'll be worming through this material forever and writing about this topic, this subject in some ways forever. So the archive is endless and it grows, and what you do with it, I think, can change. But I mean, the fact that the worm is a figure, dead things, for me, that was identifying with that creature, and I have quite a few creaturely poems, was a way of reckoning with something like the contact that you need to have with the dead for the kind of work that I'm interested in doing. And for me, the worm, like the octopus and like the narwhal and the seahorse, actually is a creature who has adapted some strategies of survival, who knows how to survive and even to flourish in conditions that are dark and repetitive and quite dull. I'm not saying this is your role, Justine. But, but all of us, our lives are dark and repetitive and quite dull a lot of the time, and the worm kind of just keeps going. And I suppose that's what it is to try to write too, because it's just failure and repetition and trying things and hoping that your last poem wasn't the last one ever, but thinking that maybe it was. So you just keep going, yeah.
And see.
I'm not sure that I've done a huge amount of work with formal archives. I've just been thinking about what the archive is. And there was, for example, one occasion when I was working in Girton College, Cambridge, on the archive of the gardener Christabel Proctor, who went with her friend Helen to live in a Quaker college in Kenya. And I read through Christabel's autobiography and other materials, and then eventually travelled to Kenya to look for traces of her garden. But unfortunately, there was no interest in taking up this project as a book. I was hoping it would be my first non-fiction book project. But the thing that was interesting to me, really, is that the actual archive was the figure of another gardener, the then head gardener at Murray Edwards College, Cambridge, who was a friend of mine, and who mentioned Christabel just by chance, because this head gardener, Joe Cobb, despite being an extraordinarily poetic thinker and filmmaker, didn't think of a library as a place that she would go. And I kept on asking her, why don't you ask for permission to go to the archive? You have a connection with Christabel Proctor, who was an old family friend. You know it's there, you know what's in it. Why are you sending me? But there was some sort of reluctance or modesty, and yet the knowledge in Joe Cobb's head was easily as great as anything in the archive. And I had this strange feeling that I was relaying it back to source when I took photographs of what I thought might be traces of Christabel's garden in Kenya, and I took some notes from the written and postcard archives in Girton College, relayed them back to Joe Cobb, and that felt to me more as if I were returning items to the archive of a human being. The other thing I'm thinking is that in Trinidad, where I was born and grew up, and from which I flew last night, so forgive me if this is a little disconnected, there's more of a difficulty with archiving because there isn't the infrastructure, and also there tends to be a reluctance, even with modern technologies, and even with the relative freedom of visa programs, a reluctance for conferences to be held in places like Trinidad. People tend to expect to fly out to London or Chicago or wherever, or be flown into them. And therefore, although there are some extraordinary archives there, they're relatively unvisited. And also material that should be archived is left to wither. I'm thinking of my grandfather, who was one of the politicians who worked for Trinidad's independence. He had a personal archive that extended from ancient palm leaf manuscripts of unknown date, which he had brought from India, or rather his grandfather had brought from India, and it extended from that all the way through to the ashes of his own mother, which he kept in a safe in the library for a long time, and then texts on astronomy and Sanskrit and so on, which he bought in India, but his own diaries and self-help books and so on to try to cope in the Western world. Sorry, I'm post-COVID, I'm not still COVIDing. And when I went into that library for the last time, the books were like withered leaves. So although it was air-conditioned and although it was a sealed room, and everything was carefully shelved, the effects of the climate were such that when I tried to pick out what looked like large, hardbound books of Sanskrit or mathematics, they fell to pieces, my hand went through them, the paper had returned to a kind of leaf meal. So I don't know how many archives in the tropics are going that way.
I feel your story's taken us back to the worm. I think just one other question before we hand over to the next team to take this stage. And that's really just, I wanted to invite both of you to say a little about, well, why you said yes to being involved in this project. I haven't had this conversation. We haven't rehearsed this. I don't know why you're here. Maybe what you might hope to get out of being involved in this project. Maybe what you might hope not to happen through this project. That would be good to know as well. And just while I'll give you a second to think about that. Gail, what you were saying about animals and inspiration, I just think what you've both said about archives, the relation to creativity. In so many ways we're talking about the relationship between the living and the dead. A few years ago I was in the audience here and I was watching the poet J.H. Prynne give a little speech about poetry. And he said that for him poetry was like a blackbird that he once saw dust bathing. And he realized that this blackbird was kind of scooping up ants under its wing to bite it and give it little kind of shocks. And he said, yeah, that's what poets are like. We kind of get down there and we get these ants up under our wings and we really kind of get into it. And that's my image of his creative process. But also, of course, now in Cambridge University Library, there are these shelves and shelves of these cardboard boxes that he kept of his writing over the years. So those for me are sort of two images of the relationship between the archive and the living poet. So over to you with that question of your hopes for this project.
My hopes and dreams. Well, when I was when I was a PhD student, I went to a large North American archive where they have the poets, they have the papers of Seamus Heaney and Ted Hughes and Michael Longley and Derek Mahon and W.B. Yeats and various people that I wanted, whose work I wanted to, whose manuscripts I wanted to see. And it was a really odd experience. And when I got there was actually a librarian who sharpened my pencil for me, which was quite extraordinary. He was an amazing, beautiful man. But I spent months in there going through all sorts of things. And it was an experience like nothing else. It was sort of a dream landscape in a way, just going in and going through all of these letters and drafts. And what interested me about this project is the curation aspect of it, for a start. I mean, I knew that Derek Mahon, was just handing over shoe boxes of ephemera for drink money. I mean, that was how that archive was composed, whereas there'd be none of that on this project, Jeremy. This project, it wants to, I was interested in it because it was curated because of the loan aspect, so we're not being paid to give anything to the archive, although we'll be paid for some activities around it, but that struck me as interesting because, this...
No drink money.
Pardon, no drink money. No, but the one that I was at was sort of like, it was Coca-Cola money. And the irony was that the poets giving work, they were handing over their shoeboxes because they were being paid more for their ephemera than they were selling poetry books, which is a scandal, really. So the model of this and the kind of the ethics of the model really interested me, and also that it's kind of, going out and trying to create contemporary poetry by people who are at an earlier stage of their career, like myself, who has just published one full-length, well, it's not even a collection. What is it? It's a book. And also where are all the cis white dudes? Like, it's very weird to be in a project, which is, trying to do something new and just think about all the ethics of all that in all kinds of ways. So I was interested in that. And I was also interested in thinking of what my limits would be. Like what do I want to make available for people to kind of do with what they want? And what do I want to hold back? Because obviously I have this dad box, but just because I have this kind of ready-made thing, it doesn't mean I want to hand that over. So it was an interesting opportunity to come back to the material that had been the material for the book and think about it through a new lens, and to think about what other people might want to do with that, and also to all the other things like email and drafts and all the kind of the process-led sort of documents that chart the genesis of a project. It'd be interesting to look back over that for myself and think about, would that be interesting to anybody else? I think my archive alone is going to be a lot less interesting than yours, because there was talk of costumes and all kinds of things. Mine's going to be a stack of paper. Yours is going to have more interesting things, am I right?
I don't think so, because we won't be able to get them over from Trinidad and I can't store them in Edinburgh, so I'm afraid they're going to go to the tip.
Photographs, maybe.
Sorry, that is a sad but true thing, that I think one of the things I'd like to look at with this archive is precisely as it's not an archive of cis white dudes. Does any of us have a secret cis white dude inside them? Sorry, like you have two wolves inside me. I don't. I had this conversation with a Cambridge writer once about how, having been brought up in former colonies, one grows up to identify with the narrative voice of the kind of boy who climbs a mountain using a Smith's knife and then never really quite disidentifies. But in terms of what would happen with this project, I think I'd like the archive to be an index of precarity rather than an index of the ideal. That's one thing. So I'm aware that, for example, when I was staying with my mother over the last week, she's had a habit of keeping a diary. She's much better at archiving than I am. And I didn't realise she still kept that habit, so she's now not going to be here for very long at all. But she asked me quite casually, "What did we do yesterday?" And I thought it was an Alzheimer's test that she was giving herself or something. But it wasn't. She was writing very carefully in her diary, in those narrow little boxes, 2 or 3 sentences, by which she can reconstruct years going back to the 1970s or 80s. And I've done nothing like that. And part of the reason is, I think, in this generation, people move around much more unless they're incredibly privileged or cis-white or something. And this means that either notebooks get lost or they don't get kept or they're used for several different things. There are quite a few notebooks I couldn't give to an archive because they're half academic, half poetry, and they also contain things like shopping lists and passwords. Just because I had one notebook, it was all I could physically carry on impossible commutes. So archive is an index of precarity, of the underrepresented. And the second thing would be that the archive is actually used. I'm definitely the pessimist in the answers here. Because I was working on an amazing project with Gemma Robinson and James Proctor, then at the Universities of Stirling and Newcastle, in partnership with Blood Axe on Black and Asian poetry of place. And among other things, we went on to produce resources such as a digital map of the British Isles. And this could light up with different poems. But we weren't looking at nostalgia or loss. It wasn't tell us how you terribly missed mangoes and then found them in a corner shop. It really was an open brief of poetry in place. Kayo Chikinjwanyi, for example, came up with a very beautiful sort of poetry of the corner and what happens when you go around corners, what it means to change your angle on a street. But that project hasn't been taken up. I keep seeing what look like faint echoes and replicas, faint attempts at psychogeographies or revisioning, and all that material is there and not being used. So can this archive live?
Can these bones live? I think that's the question where we should leave the stage and invite Will and Joelle and Jay up. So join me in thanking Anthony, Vahni and Gail.
Hello. Okay, I'm going to introduce Jay, Bernard, and Joelle Taylor, and they're going to read in that order. Jay Bernard is a writer from London. They're the author of Surge, which won a Ted Hughes Award and a Sunday Times Young Writer of the Year. They also actually wrote a pamphlet called The Red and Yellow Nothing, which is out of stock, it's completely sold out, but was published by Ink, Sweat and Tears, who are represented in the table at the back. They're currently living in Berlin. They're on a DARD residency. And they're developing a monologue called Joint, which is going to be performed at the South Bank Centre next month, if you're around. Joelle Taylor, actually in a kind of cool historical coincidence, not really a coincidence though, met Jay almost 20 years ago, right? In Battersea? Was it Battersea? No. Brixton, okay. Yeah, and so Joelle founded Ambassadors and has nurtured many generations of poets through that, and is also the author of Songs My Enemy Taught Me and Canto and Othered Poems, which won the T.S. Eliot Prize. And she's produced works for radio and toured extensively and has performed twice at the Sydney Opera House. Is that right? I just still can't really go over that. How many times have you performed there? Okay, I'm going to hand over to Jay and then Joelle.
Oh, hello, everybody. Thank you so much for having me and for inviting me on this project. And it's really nice to be in Norwich again. I actually did a project here about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, in this very hall. It's called Tombland. It's online. It's a game. And it was sort of all about sort of thinking about the echoes and the voices and the sounds that this room would have heard. So it's really nice to be actually in here performing and reading for you all. I'm just going to read a few things. I'm going to read a little bit from this new piece that I'm kind of writing called Joint, and then I'm going to read a couple of poems as well. Archives, it's kind of a sort of a big thing for me. I think it's sort of become quite a major sort of part of kind of what I do and sort of my practice. And Surge was really one kind of iteration of that. And I kind of sort of started looking at a law, actually. And maybe some of my work has become a little bit more interested in the legal precisely because that is kind of the origin of the archive in many ways, like this idea of the archive as a byproduct of the function of the state is increasingly interesting as you kind of look deeper into it. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of a law called joint enterprise. Anyone ever heard of it? A few people will have. It's a little piece of common law that is that it's no longer called joint enterprise even, but it's a principle really that if one has foresight of a crime, then you are as culpable as the person who actually committed it, even if you didn't. And I'm just going to kind of leave it there because it's actually quite complicated. But when you start to think about that more deeply, it gets stranger and stranger the more you think about it. One of the biggest cases was a man named Derek Bentley, who was sort of hung essentially, but was kind of well known not to have committed that crime, and that's kind of what I've been writing about. So I'm going to read just a little bit from a piece called Joint. I've been looking at this letter, written by a man named William Bentley. He lived at number 1 Fairview Road, Norbury. The letter is dated November 11th, 1952. He's asking about why his son was categorized as grade 4 after his medical assessment earlier that year. His son's name is Derek Bentley. And what you've got to understand is that at this point, Derek Bentley is on trial for murder. Would you be kind enough to let me know particulars of Derek William Bentley history? He was examined on the 11th of the 2nd, 52, grade 4. And would you please let me know what grade 4 is subject to, as I, his father, would like the information which may help in his case. I am enclosing a postal reply stamped, thanking you for your kind cooperation. Yours faithfully, W.G. Bentley. A working-class man has a hunch that his son's medical history might help with his case and writes a polite inquiry requesting that information. But he never received a reply. And in the court, a month later, the details of that fateful night that landed Derek in the dock would be replayed. November 2nd, 1952. A little girl sees 2 men breaking into a warehouse on Tamworth Road in Croydon. Her mother alerts her father, who calls the police. When the police arrive, one of the men, Derek Bentley, is arrested. The police call to the other one, Christopher Craig, still on the roof, to come down. According to the police, Derek shouts, "Let him have it, Chris!" And moments later, Christopher Craig starts shooting. 9 shots in all. Blam! 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 Wounds one of the officers. More police arrive. A battle ensues, and Craig shoots PC Sidney Miles in the head between the eyes. It's a full-on shootout in the middle of Croydon. Blam! 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 The press at the time compared it to all the gang violence in Chicago and New York. With no more ammunition and faced with arrest, Christopher Craig throws himself off the building, crashes through a glass roof, and injures himself. Christopher Craig was 16, Derek Bentley was 18. But what you've got to understand about Derek was that he had a mental age of 11, a reading age of 4, kept lots of animals, had a family that looked out for him. Does someone like that have the capacity for murder, to shout something as insidious and cold-blooded as "let him have it"? But Sidney Miles was murdered with a bullet to the head. Someone had to hang. Craig was too young, but Derek Bentley wasn't, so they sentenced him to death. This next piece was something that I did for Simon Armitage's sort of big sort of symposium that he held last year, and I was given, it was all about the Human Rights Act, and I was given Article 28, which is the right to a free and fair world, and it's a really interesting piece to kind of look into kind of what that idea is, and also the time that the Human Rights Act was kind of written in and created. And the more I kind of tried to write about this quite large idea of free and fair and what that could mean and what a free and fair world could be, the more I realised I had to kind of come down into sort of smaller, into my own experience. And so this was written around Christmas time last year, when there was a very kind of strange series of events, and all of this is true, free and fair. Our stab wounds were not inflicted. Sean Bonney. A man is stabbed. One of two things can happen. He bleeds to death. An officer saves him. So an officer saves him. One of two things can happen. The man is grateful, celebratory. The officer is lauded as a hero. The officer is lauded as a hero. In the papers, the stabbed man lives because the officer broke down the door, pulled a tea towel tight around the wound. A tea towel is pulled tight around the wound. One of two things is true. The assailants are found. The assailants get away. So the assailants get away. The man, his mother, the house are covered in blood when the officer, lauded as a hero, saves the man's life. Having saved the man's life, the officer finds drugs laid out on the table, or he finds the assailants hiding in the night. The officer finds drugs laid out on a table. The papers don't say that the officer charges the man whose life he saved, a court date set. Either the stabbed man recovers and is acquitted, the assailants are caught and tried. The stabbed man is tried and sentenced, the assailants vanish and are free. So the assailants vanish and are free. The stabbed man is tried, sentenced, a free trial, a fair hearing. He is led away with his arm in a sling. Ancient theatre this. A man is stabbed, calls out, invites the wrath of what he called upon. And ancient law. Life given and taken, as sure as life is given and taken. And I'm just going to end with two really short poems. When I tried to talk to my grandparents about their lives, the resounding response was just silence. They had very little to say about what they'd experienced and what they'd lived through. And what I started to realise was that the story of the Windrush and the story of that kind of Atlantic journey had become a kind of emotional map, almost, for what it was they weren't saying. And these two poems came after my final two grandparents did pass in 2020. They both sort of died in that big sort of pandemic year. And I remember when my grandma finally did pass, it felt like the sky had opened and that I was exposed now in a way that I had never experienced before. So I'm going to just sort of read these two poems for them. Pollen. I order flowers for my mother's dead mother. I remember my father's father died too, but I do not send him any flowers. What provenance, my mother's crowd of keepers, my father's single room. I light neither father candles and grow more like them. I disappear when two remembered. Quartet. There is a band whose songs are forgotten by all who hear them. As the cellist's resin travels the bow, so do I forget the long and short of a 4-part harmony, the one where you must switch from what came after to what comes before. Thank you.
Oi, oi, hello. Just to reiterate, it's a huge honour to be asked to store some of my materials, and it's actually really handy because it just takes up so much space. Knickers, the lot. One of the most interesting things about, so the last two books I've written are really about accessing archives, some in a very formal way to do with, and so, some of the archives are about news reports, some are spaces like the Bishopsgate Institute or the Glasgow Women's Library or the Feminist Library. But the most important archive really is the archive of the body for me. And I believe that bodies are libraries and everything that's ever happened to us is reflected in the body. And also that we carry, what are archives? They're ghosts, aren't they? And we carry all these ghosts within us. So particularly when writing Canto and other poems, which is the story really of friendship and of the butch counterculture in the late 80s and 90s across the UK, in fact, across the Western world. It becomes, the archive bit is alive, even though it's sometimes about people who are dead and who've passed. Indeed, it's a bit of a memoir about dead people. The living aspect is really only coming out from having read quite a lot from the book. And a lot of the people who are talked about in the book are coming back, not the dead ones, because that would be wrong, but people who were there. And I'm really interested in that, us as archives. So I'm going to read some cantos from the long piece Canto, because this was the very first poem I wrote, and it was just written in grief, really. It's in 7 parts. It's called Canto, which is a real word. But I'll only read a few of them until my clock says stop. Canto. Some girls fall from sun-lit skies straight down into flat pack floral dresses, grab their smiles from a hook behind the door, rescue their faces from riptides of mirrors. Some girls are always falling. Round 1. The body as battleground. You fall and miss your body entirely, land somewhere in enemy territory behind the lines. Your body, a foreign country you cannot get a visa for. Your skin, a parachute caught in tree branches. You awaken in no man's land. Gunfire from over the horizon, and women are crucified on hashtags across the dark hills. Your trench is crowded with dead women, wearing faces that try to escape them, and the clothes of someone you once knew. There are landmines buried deep beneath your skin, and no one understands them. In between the battle cry and the bedroom is this sticky quiet, this no man's land, and this is where you live. Men explode when you least expect it. All these lifetimes searching for body. Round 2, the body as protest. Born backward, bright back and wide, skin rolling cigarettes and shirt sleeves, skyline chin, Levi 501s curled up to cuff, lip the same, white t-shirt so they can project themselves on you, tsunami quiff, and black boots whose roots spread and tangle to the center of the earth. You don't wear makeup to prove you have not made anything up. This is your face. Your father's friends gave it to you one Christmas Eve, 1973. You unwrapped it from beneath a decorated tree from which the rest of your family hung. They sipped cocktails as you slowly disappeared, swaying gently to that wail of celebration, the harbinger of party. You cut your first suit from the thick silence when you enter a room. They call you butch, The name derived from Butch Cassidy. You are the descendant of outlaws. Irony incarnate. A woman butchered, cut into select meats, middle distance stare, shoulder, breast, wild tongue. They fear you. Boy, dyke. Diesel female sodomite, lady faggot bulldyke, bulldagger queer pervert, gold star silverback stud, invert, kiki shemale drag drone, baby butch tomboy, stone. But if you are a stone, you are a chip off the mountain and you join an avalanche of wrong, walking women, shaven heads like tumbling rocks. You keep them close, they are. Rosary. On the dance floor, we are tidal. Heckled the night, passing nods between us and handshakes that stop our handshaking. We are untamed, a wilderness of women. We are waste ground. What a waste, love. Nothing grows on us, barren and sterile and unuseful female, empty as church pews. The wind rattles its fists inside our wombs. Come on then, snake boy. Come now, heretic healer. Where are the maths that solve us? How do we fit into your algae bra, your binary code, our bodies, our political placards? And we dance as demonstration of independence. We revolution in the living room, uprising in the public toilets, insurgency in the suburbs. Fear is a girl backing into her face. Round 4. The body as cemetery. The first time you die, you drink a bottle of cleaning fluid and moths of nurses wrap you in white swaddling curses. Fuck you, they whisper, a back alley lullaby. Fuck you, they croon as you're interred into your hospital bed. And when the mourners come, they seem happy. A picnic in a mortuary. The third time you die, it's classic, cinematic. A bottle of your mother's sleeping pills, you swallow them without water, watching a film about a girl who is not loved. The film ends, the cinema empties, but no one notices the thin thing lying there with a mouth like an earthquake in a country no one can spell. They don't find you till morning, and when they do, you are packed off to the fat priests of psychiatry to apologize. You lie, and your smile, a torn conus, a split. Round 5, the body as backroom. Each night, we have a lock-in, a meet at the back of my heart, smoking in circles, handing grins between us like pass the parcel, opening each layer of the smile until the pith is revealed. We are ferocious women, eating our children, our youth, stepping out of our skins and leaving them draped behind us like soiled wedding dresses falling into each other's mouths. This is love. Furious love. We die slowly. Cigarettes stubbed against obsidian skies. A brain explodes into night butterflies. A car loses its grip on reality, suicides by the bouquet full. Not one of my friends was allowed to live in her body unaccompanied. Always a lodger, always a landlord. Round 6, the body as haunted house. In sleep, my body is a haunted house. There are footsteps along fallopian corridors. The corridor is a rope strung above a mouth. I have been woken by blurred voices without bodies, quiet arguments in my basement once. I was possessed by a small girl who looked the same as me, who ate herself on a Sunday afternoon while her parents were downstairs hardwiring their hangovers and Christmas tunes played in nooses. My heart is a church bell and nobody visits, and God is a man with his hands in his pockets, watching. Round 7, the body as uprising. Oh, you bayonet boys, you truncheon rub. My face doesn't fit my face, but your fist does. Years from now, no one will remember how we fought, how each bruised knuckle was a white boy's head bent in prayer. No one will remember the love, how alike it is to rage, how screams made corporeal are rainbows, or how rainbows became corporate logos, or how we carved our epitaphs into stone walls. No one will remember unpicking acronyms by candlelight, so I'll be in the back bar of heaven. Kaz will be getting a rounding and releasing that laugh. Wild birds escaping her mouth, and none of this will matter. I'll be riding the ghost roads with Valentine, bareback, knee clench on her Harley. I'll be scuffing the city with Dudzilly. Men will stare like open shaft mines. I'll be walking the white lines with Tony. No, walking the white lines with Angel. Tight mouth, antelope heart. I can't remember the names of all my dead friends. They're here now. Our grief, a leather jacket. Our laughter, static, as we fade to a sepia, the color of blood mixed to water, disappearing down a plug hole, much like the meeting of our legs. Remember this. My whole life is a protest. Thank you.
I was just thinking, since it's a theme, the theme tonight seems to have been this thing Gail said about how our archives make the dead speak or speak back. And I was just thinking how silence can only really exist among people who are alive. That actually we think of people when they die as passing over into silence, but silence can exist in this room between us because we're all here. And that actually speech becomes necessary when someone dies.
Yeah, it's like, in fact, it's the noisiest time, I think, in someone's life. It's a really astute observation I think you've made there. And certainly, like, my head's been very noisy. My whole body's been really noisy, full of people. And it's, but you can try so hard, as I imagine Gail has. You try and try and try to write that moment, or to write about, you know, to give life, to breathe life back into somebody, or to talk about what they did. But it takes years and years. It's a strange thing. You have to wait for the voices to get loud enough. They take over.
I wonder, curious about like the impossibility and the ambivalence of that, because you're speaking for them in place of them. You're giving them a voice, but it's still your voice. Like with Derek Bentley, with the victims of the New Cross fire, however much research you do, however close you get, however much, even if you've known those people, like with your grandparents, with friends, how do you, I don't know, it's obviously an empowering thing.
It's actually really upsetting to think of it like that. You're just literally sitting talking to yourself. But that's precisely what it is. Because the ghosts are inside us.
Yeah, I agree. And it's been really interesting writing a piece about the Bentley case for two reasons. First of all, to write a kind of dramatic, hybrid, poetic monologue, you really feel that this is just someone talking to themselves on a stage. But I think that is what's necessary. I think actually the engagement that we have with that inner voice does something for us.
Do you mean, so when you say voice, so there's there's Derek Bentley's voice, and then there's the voice on a stage. Is that the distinction you're drawing?
No, what I mean is literally, it's awkward when you realise that you are talking to yourself. I literally mean that. But second, I would also say that the voice inside you as an individual has to be spoken back to.
What was your process with Surge and kind of finding a way to speak both back to yourself but also to these kind of real voices that could no longer speak?
Yeah, it was a tricky one because it's always really tricky, I think, to work with materials. I was really noticing actually as Gail was reading, I was like, it's the difference between writing from one's own experience or one's own life versus kind of going out into the world and writing about something that is part of your culture and your history but isn't directly personally yours. So to be honest with you, writing Surge was extremely fraught for that reason. I sort of really wondered what I was doing and why and who I was talking to and what the point was and whether what I was doing was even necessary or needed. And then I think I kind of got to a point where I realised actually, there's a reason that poetry is so twinned with memory, and why memory comes up so much when we're talking about archives. And I actually don't think they're the same thing at all. I think they're two different functions. But memory is absolutely vital, and I think memory is a speaking back to that inner self, whether that be at a national level or a personal level. But I do think there's shades in all of this that have become clearer since writing Surge. So yeah, I mean, it's really hard to talk about my process because it's there's a lot in it, a lot happened, a lot changed.
Do you connect with that, Joelle?
Yeah, I really connect with it. Particularly, so with Songs My Enemy Taught Me, which was something like my third book, where I was trying to write about a very personal experience of sexual abuse, but was unable just to write about my own experience. Now I look back at it and think, why was I talking about everyone else? And part of it is really important, I think, to have tried to create a sort of encyclopedia of shit things that happen to women. I'm sure I have to think of a better phrase for it. But it's looking at the state of what it is to be woman in 2017. That was essentially it. And making connections about sexual terrorism. So it was a kind of a process of doing something very deeply personal. And then really what I was doing was, I thought I was making political connections and emotional connections, but I was hiding quite a lot. So with Conto, it was so much easier that I forgot to say that the poem I just read parts of there was commissioned as a part of a wider project about protest. So that's what came up about the body. And because it was so personal, and then I felt very haunted by all of my friends who'd died. But I feel haunted by them in a really lovely way. you know, and it's like the ghosts come back and they kind of return your body to yourself. It's a strange kind of process. I mean, I have no idea what writing even is. I've been doing it my whole life. I've absolutely no idea. I know I think about something and then I try to make it work. But so much is a haunting, really, for me personally. And archives just give me something physical to hold, something real that I can point things to, you know. Particularly odd archival stuff, like the queer archives, are very interesting compared to the more academic ones.
I feel like we don't have that much time. There's kind of a lot more I could say, but maybe following on from that, how do you both feel, having worked with other archives, about this project, kind of turning it on yourself? Jay?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, listening to the previous two answers. I think the only thing I can really say is that the more I investigate and the more I spend time in these spaces, trying to do this kind of writing, the more slippery and strange it becomes, and the more I see the conflations that we make when we talk about archives and collections and libraries and memory and history. All of these things, they sort of swirl around something, and maybe what you're saying about hiding touches slightly on that. There's something I'm trying to crack. Working with all of this material is something I'm trying to articulate and investigate, and I don't know what it is. And I think that's probably the best kind of research, where you don't know necessarily what the outcome is going to be, or even what you're looking for.
Yeah. One of the things that's exciting about this for me is that publishing. You just see the outcome. You just see the final bound book. And I feel like both of your works is so much, the process is such a big part of it, like you were saying, that it's almost impossible to articulate in a linear way.
Absolutely, and I think for me, one of the exciting things about this project is being able to curate what goes in to the archive within limits. So it's not all just going to be papers. I want to give you things that smell, things you can touch, to show you what to show you what it was like during a certain period. Because I've been doing poetry since I was 15, so that's 40 years of going on stages and a lot of. I want to, try to create an experience, if that's possible.
I actually did say very early on I want to bring smell into the archive.
Did you?
I don't know how that's possible.
Come on,
Maybe
we can do it.
Can it somehow? If anyone has
Yes. Can I look? Yeah.
Smell. What would? Okay, maybe a final fun question. If you could include one smell in the archive in a can that someone would go into a closed room and just open, like, psst, what would that? That was a really bad sound. Sorry, can you do a bit?
Yeah, I know exactly what the smell would be.
All right, Joel.
So it would be a mixture of cinnamon, marijuana, and just tobacco.
All combined. Wow, that's such a great. I can almost smell it.
It's because that's what I smell like.
Yeah, just come up and talk to Joel if you want to smell that right at the end of this event.
Do you know what? Like maybe this is a bit TMI, but I'm always really, you know, when you go to other people's houses and you really smell them, I'd be really interested in somebody like swabbing me and kind of sort of like really like distilling what that smell is. But most specifically my mouth. I don't know why. I sort of want someone to.
Wow. That would be the smell, like
my breath,
swabbed inside of your mouth.
Yeah, and however that like grows and changes over hundreds of years.
That's amazing.
I just think that would be such an experience.
Wow, I feel like that's an incredibly exposing answer. That's like even more, No, it's really
Let's
that's
do
like a
it.
very beautiful level
Yeah.
of vulnerability. I feel like.
Yeah, it's like artists, artist shit. That
Just,
little can.
just like the shirts that you haven't
Haven't washed.
yeah, that kind of thing, with aftershave and the ubiquitous marijuana,
Yeah.
the weed.
Body, the archive of the body.
There we go.
Maybe we should end there. All right. So I think unless Jeremy wants to say anything at the end, maybe there's wine at the back and some pamphlets from Ink, Sweat and Tears. But thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to Gail, Anthony, Jay, and Joelle, and
Thank you.
stay around and chat. See ya.